Now, to see, I have to scroll down.
Okay, I will move the screen as Dick talks about it. Okay, Mr. Bolin, are you ready?
I have to
Yes.
see different people because they don't all fit on this.
Yeah, you don't need to see the people. We're just going to focus on what Dick is saying, start with, and then I'll pull up the grid and I'll make sure we look at everybody. Okay, Dick, you're on.
All right. Well, would first like to welcome all of you this afternoon for this talk we have, and I'm hoping this will be informative and meaningful. And I realize that some of the folks, especially on the council, have had some exposure to some of this information already. However, I will assume that for those of you who have not had that opportunity, so I will have tried to gear this in a way that it will be hopefully straightforward, even if this is your first time of being exposed to some of the different considerations here. And I think we're a small enough group so that if you do have any questions, I'll try to move through carefully and thoughtfully. However, if something does not make sense, please feel free to let me know and I'll try to elaborate so that that will be resolved before we proceed. So anyway, as I think you have heard, St. Mark's was approached by a company that was interested in acquiring our Verizon lease. And just to give a moment of the history of this, back in 2000, St. Mark's basically entered into an agreement with Verizon to provide them an easement so that they could use some of our limited space and operate a telecommunications tower as well as the generator and the related equipment that it was needed on our church premises. And of course, that amount of rent has increased over the years, and that current amount has been more recently about $1,700 per month. And very recently was noticed that that needed to be increased, and that Verizon had gotten behind on that, and they were notified, and that has now been bumped up to $1,800 per month, and we will be getting a healthy retroactive check of a little bit under $5,000 to as well. So that will be something nice that will be coming, I believe, here soon in June. Okay. Now, as I had mentioned, TowerPoint has basically reached out and contacted us, and they are one of the larger tower acquisition companies in the United States. And they have actually acquired approximately 4,000 different such towers and have expended in those payments over $1 billion, okay? And so they had expressed an interest, and I have been dealing with them on the request of the council for about 4 months, and we've been talking over different potential scenarios and terms and conditions. And so what I'd like to do is to explain those to you, and hopefully I have captured the primary ones that are of concern or interest to you. As you will see there in the terms and conditions to consider, TowerPoint has offered a lump sum payment of $375,000. And so that amount we would get upon the closing of this transaction. And then they would then begin receiving the revenues from Verizon that we have been historically receiving, okay? Now, they had focused on this larger amount. Now, as we had talked about some scenarios in terms of the duration of the agreement, as you could probably expect, if it is of a shorter term, and you can see on paragraph 2, and none of these, of course, durations are very short, but you've got also the scenario of a 50-year duration then the lump sum payment would be a little bit less, okay? And then if it was going to be for an even shorter duration, 30-year terms, then as one would kind of expect, then the payment would be less as well. In that case, 300,000. Okay. Of course, the amount that we focused on more, though, discussed initially, is the longer term and the larger amount for 300 to 75,000. Now, that being said, and as we go into paragraph 3, realistically, however, the useful life of this arrangement will be a considerably shorter span in all likelihood. And this is where we get into certain projections, and this is where it gets a little bit difficult, because some analysts suggest that probably the useful life of such an arrangement will be more in terms of 8 years, 10 years, perhaps 12 years estimate. Although these are just estimates based on technical analysts in the industry, and certainly it could be a different duration, it could be even longer, or it could be considerably shorter. In fact, theoretically, Verizon could give us a 30-day notice and say, we no longer have any use for your tower in this arrangement, and with the 30-day written notice, they could terminate any additional funds, and they could come in, decommission the equipment, and take that away. That is going to happen anytime in the future. But I just wanted to mention that we have here several different possibilities of how that could go. So let's see. So the projection is beyond that time frame, the telecommunication architecture will quite possibly change with the current arrangement, and it could become outdated, it could become antiquated, and as I was mentioning, it could then be decommissioned and be removed from the property. Now, regardless, as we get into point 4, regardless of the useful duration of this lease, whether it would be for a short period or a longer period, with this lump sum payment that we would receive, it would be paid at closing and it would be non-refundable. Okay, that means that once we get that, if for example, Verizon wants to end our agreement 3 months thereafter, we would have that money, and TowerPoint would have no income, at least from Verizon, coming in. So they would be assuming the entire financial risk that becoming outdated should the technology in telecommunications, should the landscape change. And of course, as you probably have seen and heard, that is something that does change rather exponentially. We do have situations now in which telecommunication companies have reached out to individuals like ourselves, landlords, and they have said that the technology is changing. This tower is no longer as highly valued as it was, and we would like to have the revenue reduced 25% or perhaps 50%. And that sometimes does happen. Also, there's other things that are going on, for example, where they are putting towers and these types of hardware on other places like traffic lights, and they're paying maybe $100 a year for those instead of 18 or 20 or 22,000 a year. Now, that's not to say that they always have all the capability that these towers do, but that is another thing that is going on. And then finally, one thing to consider is that we live in a day of changing tides in the way of the corporate mergers and consolidations. Just 2 months ago, this very day, back on April 1st, 2020, as you may know, Sprint was acquired by T-Mobile for about $27 billion, okay? And so we have situations in which you have this changing landscape, and as I have talked to the senior level of people at TowerPoint, and I have done some additional research, they have situations in which they have acquired towers and they have become decommissioned because of these different acquisitions and consolidations. So they act somewhat like an insurance company where, you know, they will buy these recognizing that some of them will turn out to be profitable and others will not. And so we have those things to consider. As we go on to paragraph 5, I wanted to outline a couple fairly unique features in this particular prospective agreement with TowerPoint that has not always been there in some of the other proposals, because we have been approached over the years at times by other entities who have been interested in this. But one of the good features of this particular proposal is that not only does St. Mark's get this lump sum payment of $375,000, however, also TowerPoint is going to do some marketing to see if they can enter into an agreement with perhaps a second telecommunications company. And let's say, and in that type of a situation, if they did that, St. Mark's would not only have that lump sum payment, but they would also receive the majority of the additional revenue for this second telecommunications company to the tune of 60%. So let's say if the in this additional agreement, if there was such that they would be paying, in that case, or agreeing with TowerPoint for a monthly payment of $1,800 a month, okay? St. Mark's would receive approximately 1,100 of that, and TowerPoint would receive the other 700. So we would theoretically still have some income coming in should such arrangements be consummated in the future, okay? So as I proceed here, first, are there any questions so far? I just want to make sure this all makes sense, and is there any clarification that anyone might need at this time?
Unmute yourself if you'd like to speak. I've muted everybody to try and improve the audio quality. So if you'd like to speak, feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
I have a lot of questions, but I figured I'd wait until the very end.
Okay, very well.
Anybody else?
Anyone else?
Okay.
I have a question, Dick.
Yes.
Is there any mention of the power output of the tower if additional towers are built? Has anybody ever talked about what the power output is?
I have not heard. I will certainly research that, Bob. I have not thought of that question. So I will ask TowerPoint about that. Now, I will say this. When I talked to TowerPoint, they said that with any additional agreement like we were just discussing, they believe they would still retain simply the one tree tower, what they call a mono tree here. You know, it looks like the tree.
Right.
They said that with this additional arrangement, they would be able to use, in all likelihood, the same antenna. Now, they would need an additional generator, and that's where, as we talk about the square feet, that additional easement that they may need under those circumstances. So it's not going to be like 3 or 4 or 5 towers.
Mhm.
But as far as the power, the output, I don't know that question, but I will look into it.
Okay.
And right now, Verizon is in the process of upgrading our tower and making it 5G. So they're putting in new power lines that are actually taking up the driveway from the entrance of I Street to the driveway, far driveway, northernmost driveway on the that exits Hilltop. There are going to be trenches going both directions, and they've been working up there at the cell site for a week already. And it's a good thing we're actually not going to church at the moment, because it will be inconvenient and messy for a couple more weeks. So they are increasing and changing what's going on there right now.
Okay, well, if there's no other questions, I'll proceed. But like I say, feel free to jump in if something comes up. Then on paragraph 6, and we've kind of talked about this just a moment ago, should TowerPoint market any additional companies, then in that case, they would need some additional square footage that would be primarily to house a generator, okay? And that would be an absolute maximum of 250 square feet on the church property adjacent to the existing Verizon generator and the tree antenna. And what we have, as we have discussed that, I have emphasized to TowerPoint, if that was to happen, and that would be only subject to our approval, that any additional buildup like that would have to be on the slope, as is the case with the existing one, on what I will call otherwise not particularly useful space. So this is not something, in fact, this would be in the contract, that they would not be able to encroach upon the handicap parking on the upper level. They would not be able to encroach on the trash bin area in the upper level, nor would they be able to encroach on the parking spaces on the second parking level, which is just down from the current existing place. And I know that's hard to visualize unless you've looked at it specifically, but we have emphasized that if this was ever to happen, the only place that they could house this equipment, and this would be near the other equipment, is just like the others, it was on the slope, and we were not going to encroach upon the high the areas that are considered important, like the handicap parking, etc.
Mhm.
Okay, and like I had mentioned, it would be unlikely this additional lease would involve a second antenna tree. Okay, all right. So
Bob
yes.
Lechner has pictures that he got today. We'll share those when we finish the presentation, so people can revisit exactly what that area looks like. You got them, Bob? Yeah.
He does, but he left him out in the car.
Oh.
He's going to run out and get them.
All right, good. All right, thanks. Okay, go back to that, Dick. Then you're on.
Okay, so that I think pretty much covers paragraph 6 there, but I just want to emphasize, we will make sure that there's no misunderstanding, and that also, by the way, as if there was this secondary agreement that was looming, we have the authority to say, no, this doesn't work for us, and especially as we're talking about the usage of it, so that we are not going to get any, what I'm saying, big surprises in terms of what would be they would want to include there. Okay, now going forward on point 7 is paragraph 7 is another feature in this particular proposal that is somewhat different from what we have received in the past. And that talks about the fact that we also have maximum flexibility if we wanted to independently contract with another telecommunications company to build and lease an additional tower. Now, I realize at St. Mark's, we're not, none of us want to be primarily in the tower business. So I'm not suggesting that we would necessarily do this, but I'll give you a hypothetical. Let's say that we were contacted by AT&T, and they said, we would like to basically pay upfront, and we would like to establish an additional tower. And let's say if you look over in the extreme northwest corner of the parking lot on the second level, let's say, it's right over there at the very near edge of the property line. And let's say that it was determined that in that last parking space, or someplace, let's say if it could be beyond that, depending on the property line, that they wanted to invest a couple $100,000, we'll say, to put in a generator, to put in a additional mono tree, and they would take care of all the zoning and all of the city building codes and all that stuff. And again, I'm not suggesting we want to necessarily be in the tower antenna business, but my point is that if we entered into an agreement such as that, and let's say they wanted to pay out of that agreement $2,000 a month, that would all go directly to St. Mark's. TowerPoint would get no cut of that money right there, because this was something that was discussed, negotiated, and agreed upon directly between AT&T and St. Mark's. And so in that sense, we could be back, if we felt like the antenna tower business was becoming increasingly lucrative, we could actually go into that business, and we could get, even if they had gotten a second, let's say they had gotten T-Mobile, for that profit sharing that I talked about earlier, and if we later wanted to get into an agreement with another company, we could do that, and we could have a monthly flow of income coming in. And keep in mind, this is in addition to the $375,000 that we received up front with the initial agreement. And I will tell you, I have been in touch as I have done research, and I have researched this company, TowerPoint. I've researched their directors. I've researched, that they're a very ethical, financially strong company. And I've also reached out to some churches, and I'll give you one example. Carlton Hills Lutheran Church in Santee. I talked to the president of the congregation there, Daryl Timon, and they had a tower lease. They sold that lease, okay? They later had a second tower that was built. I don't know all the specifics of, but I'm sure the telecommunications company, the second one, paid for that also.
Mhm.
They later on sold that lease. They now have, they have now had established, and this is with Verizon as well, a third tower, and they are now receiving monthly income of about $1,600 a month on that. So what I'm describing has sometimes been the case. Some churches, some faith-based entities, some private organizations have done what I just described as a scenario. Again, I'm not suggesting we would need to do that, but what I want to emphasize is that this agreement would not box us in a corner so that we could not do these types of activities in the future, as I have described, should we find that to be a good fit for St. Mark's, okay? So I hope that helps, and I can answer any questions about that as well. As we go to number 8, that's highlighted there, as I mentioned, I've researched TowerPoint. I would say that it is one of the best companies for what they do. And by that I mean that they are ethical, they are honest. I have been very impressed with them. When I had first gotten involved with this, I was asked to look into this. I was skeptical. I was very skeptical of these companies. And after having probably, I would say 12 to 15 conversations, sometimes short durations, sometimes in depth, as I have interacted with them, I find that they are a good, solid company. And they would be, if we were to do something like this, I think they were the type of company that we would feel comfortable partnering with. They are an end buyer. That is, they're not like a broker who's going out and trying to drum up business and then go and try to find the financing with the actual company. They are the end buyer, and they are a very solid company. Okay, so that part I thought was also kind of a warm and fuzzy good thing. Okay, then the next thing I would like to talk about is that, and this has taken a little bit of research, but point number 9, with this transaction, there will be no tax liability associated with this TowerPoint transaction. Initially, there was concern that we might sustain, for example, a 15% long-term capital gains tax, which could equate to $56,250. And then there could be some tax liability that California would like to try to wedge in there. That would not be the case either. In conferring with some tax people and then following that, because this is, not something that is done all the time. So even these tax people don't always know everything about all of this. As research was done, as we looked into the Internal Revenue Code, for example, the like-kind exchanges in 1031, the publications that come out that discuss this, and everything, we would be fine with no tax liability. The key is that we would want these proceeds to be utilized for what I would call general fund types of expenditures. That is, if we were to take these funds and we were to invest in a diamond mine in South Africa, that could be problematic, okay? Because we're not using this for a like-kind expense. By using this for things like reducing or retiring a church mortgage on the sanctuary, on taking these funds and earmarking them for capital repair expenses or other ministries within the church, there should be no federal or state tax liability. There will be a few associated expenses with closing this, but most of those would be borne by TowerPoint. There would be some documentary tax, for example, in that, but it would be very minor compared to what it could have been with some tax liability. Okay, that makes me feel good that we're not having a considerable amount of this gobbled up with taxes. Okay, so those are some of the basic, I would say, terms and conditions. Of course, the ultimate contract is more involved than that, but those are the key features as I see them to be, okay? So
Open for questions.
where are we now? Okay, so then the next steps,
Let's just talk about questions first. Questions
Yes.
on anything that Dick just talked about. He went through the marketing of the tower to other companies. He talked about the would perhaps require a new generator and where that would be located, that they're not allowed to encroach. The contract will be written that they can't encroach on anything that we value. Only can build this north of the current tower, that 250 square feet north of the current tower, and can't encroach on any other property we value. That we still have flexibility. We've always said that our greatest asset is our property. And sitting on the hilltop becomes a real asset in terms of the changing landscape of telecommunications. So there might be another company that wanted to put a full tower up there. That leaves that open. And that TowerPoint is a highly reputable company, and that he foresees with the conversations he's had with tax accountants, they don't foresee an issue with any other tax liability. So do we have any questions on any of that section or any other part that's occurred to you now that you're hearing it?
Would you like to see a picture of where these are located, where
Sure.
we're talking about?
Sure, before we go next step, that's a perfect idea, please. Thank you.
Let me share my screen here.
Start up here, this picture first.
This one or this one?
Yeah, this one.
This one.
So this picture here just gives you a
Oh,
context.
wait, we need to get it up.
Oh,
Don't
okay.
see it.
Okay. Do you see my screen, Sherry?
No, I don't. Just a minute. Let me see.
Okay.
No, I don't see a share on yours.
You've got participant sharing disabled.
Oh, all right. Well, that wasn't intended. Let's see what I can do to help that. All right. Where's that control? Oh, let's see if it's here. No, it is not working. All right. If I stop mine, let's see what happens.
I think it might be in the settings for this.
For this meeting, the question is whether I can change those while I'm in here.
Can you look at the little arrow by the video? Does that have anything?
No arrow by video.
Or is there anything when you click on share screen? Is there any permission?
Multiple participants can share. Just a minute.
Yes, that
There
would
you
do
go.
it.
Sorry.
Yay. Now, can you see it?
Not yet. There it is. We've got it.
There it is.
Okay, so the context of this is the third of the 3 levels coming off of Hilltop Drive. If you look to the left, you see the tree. That tree is the tower. And the brown fence that comes down below the tree is at the parking lot level, whereas the generator and the other part of the tree are up higher at the disabled parking slash level. Okay, so
right.
no. So
Back
if
to
you
the other one.
Yeah. If you look at this, you can see that from here, there's about 4 parking spots taken up. This area is ours, but it comes down to a triangle, and right over here is where you turn to go exit the parking lot. So this is the exit. So it's not like we own a rectangular area that comes down. It's kind of triangular coming to a point. And Dick has looked at some of the property lines on maps to determine how much this part down here is useless for anything that would have to expend back more than 5 or 6 feet. But right here, if you look at this part right next to where the existing cell tower is, and we have the next picture. you could see where the cell tower and this part up here goes back to about here.
Top of the ridge.
And right here, even if you just went to this area and down where the ice plant kind of is, you could take a bulldozer and bulldoze back there about 14 feet.
Mm-hmm.
You would have to put up a retaining wall because the ground would be unstable if it was just straight up and down dirt. Put a retaining wall back here. If it went back 14 feet, you could go down 18 feet, and that equals 250 square feet.
So about the distance of those 3 parking spaces you're thinking?
Mhm.
Yeah, there's no parking, past this. And to tell you the truth, very few people park here on Sunday. Sometimes people do, but even if you did on Sunday, no one's going to be using this working at the tower. The tower work would be Monday through Friday
Mm-hmm.
if they
So-
wanted to get to it. So
we don't lose those parking
so
spaces.
in a way, we don't really lose them. I mean, this is a gate here.
Yeah.
And we could still park here. The gate has to open. This is where the tree comes down. But
Yeah. They would only do that if they've never done it to my knowledge since we've had the tower.
that's right.
Yeah.
So if we go from here, 14 by 18, we don't lose any of the dumpster or
Right.
disabled parking area at the top.
Right.
That's my opinion, anyway.
And that's what we're looking at, is that space.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, any questions, any other questions now? Thank you very much, Bob.
Mhm.
That's it helps people understand what's going on. Any other questions? Put yourself on if you need to ask a question. You can unmute yourself. Okay, then we'll go back to,
Jerry,
yes.
I think you already said that no modifications or reparations will be done during the weekend, right?
I don't anticipate that. That only reason
on
there would be
Sunday.
someone there is if they had an emergency problem with it. They're working right now to update it to 5G, and they're only there from 8 to 5 on a weekday. There's no one working right now.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would not affect us then. Uh-huh.
No. Any other questions? Okay, Dick, we'll go back to the comments then. Let me do a screen share. I lost it again. Just a second. I hit it.
I think there was a part where it said next steps if St. Mark's is interested in pursuing.
Mm-hmm. I just need to get it back up. For some reason here, where's my screen share view?
Should be bottom center if you hover down there.
Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay. Let's try basic. That would be helpful. Get the right one on. There we go.
Okay, very good. And I want to first say along those lines, I sure appreciate, Bob, you getting those pictures. I know we've talked some on the phone, about that. And just as you had mentioned, if there ever was this additional construction there, that would all be borne by the basically the telecommunications company doing that, so that would not be any out-of-pocket expenses that St. Mark's would have in like building up the side of the wall to make it even, just as it's done right now.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for doing that. So as we say, next steps, if St. Mark's is interested in pursuing this, and of course this has been discussed with the council, and as they examine the Constitution, of course it alludes to the fact that if there's a real estate transfer, that should be something that's decided by the congregation. And even though this is not technically a transfer of real estate, it's an easement, it was felt by the council, and I think this was a good decision, that from a transparency standpoint, from giving the congregation all of the information, that this was something that would be decided by the congregation, so that it was not done, at a council meeting, and there was not, no one else knew about that. They want to make sure that the entire congregation is informed and that they are in accord with this proposal, should it be decided that way. So anyway, so that would be, one of, the next steps as we're going through this right here. And then should it go for approval, then what would happen is that there would be initially what's called a letter of intent, kind of a memo of understanding, where there would be a preliminary document signed, and this would be essentially a purchase option. They would provide usually it's a relatively small sum of money, but gives them the right such that, number one, if, we're basically would then be on our way to a full-fledged agreement with them that would close in about 60 to 90 days thereafter, okay? But that would be an agreement where then, St. Mark's would only be engaged in these negotiations with TowerPoint. That is, we couldn't turn around and look for other companies and see if they would give us more money, but rather it starts the process where it'll do some of the things that'll be described in a moment. And basically, we would not, we would be going forward in good faith with this particular agreement, and they would expect us, to go in that direction as they're starting to incur more and more costs. I would then be very happy to augment the letter of intent via an addendum to make sure any vital terms and conditions that are important to St. Mark's would be articulated up front at this very preliminary time, so that we are all on board, and that we will continue to discuss those things. An example of that, of course, is just as we've talked with, if we ever had this need to have them have an easement for an additional maximum of 250 square feet. And so just as I have talked to them about, can't encroach on the handicap, can't take up the garbage bin space, can't take up the second level parking spaces, that would all be reflected in that agreement. Moreover, it would allow TowerPoint to begin some of the process of, seeing the copies of the Verizon lease agreements and amendments that we have. That is to confirm that the income that we've indicated we're receiving, they see evidence of that. And of course, proof of the fairly recent rent payments, access to existing mortgage information, to be aware of any encumbrances that there might be on the property, access to some basic organizational documents. And then, like I had said, they would fully expect with this letter of intent that St. Mark's would proceed forward in good faith in an effort to complete this transaction. Okay, so then as you go on to the next bullet, basically what would come out of that after all of that, and that's when you get into the more comprehensive contract agreement that we would have with them, that would represent about 14 major sections that has a lot more detail in that. And if you wanted me to, I would be willing to review that line by line, sentence by sentence, and have the ability and the authorization to negotiate, to redline the agreement, to provide alternative ways of things being articulated in there that might be more fair to St. Mark's, and to be able to modify or remove portions that we find would be important. So the bottom line is we would come to a meeting of the minds where we would, both TowerPoint and St. Mark's would ensure that it was fair. And of course, my focus would be that it is fair to St. Mark's, okay? And, but we want to make sure all the things that have been discussed and that we anticipate are reflected in there. That's nothing is just something that was orally mentioned, but it's all in writing. And then that whole process could take up to 90 days after congregational approval. And then we would get our money and we would proceed accordingly. So.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dick. I just wanted to point out, one of the questions I had when this first started was like, what's the future of 5G? Because I had heard that 5G was going to be put on every light post in order to make it accessible across the country. And I was wondering what kind of lifespan a tower at all has today, or what kind of future they're thinking. And when Dick came back after his first conversation with TowerPoint, they said, and realistically, as he said earlier, they were looking for an 8 to 12-year return on their money. Now, what I learned as an administrator was when you hire someone, you expect to make 5 times their salary in value to the organization. In this case, I figure that TowerPoint, the only reason TowerPoint wants this property, wants this lease, is because they see at least double, if not 4 or 5 times as much value and income to them from subleasing space on this tower. So that's I think what's motivating them. If they were going to make $375,000 off this, there'd be no reason for them to buy it. They have to be seeing as Dick said, opportunities for them to generate revenue, which would in turn generate 60% of that revenue back to St. Mark's. So we don't know what that would be. That's not articulated. We have no idea what they would do. Even if they did nothing with it, we would still walk away with the $375,000 or less if we decided we just didn't want to lease it for the rest of forever for 99 years. Although, it's 25 or 50 or 99. It's into a time none of us can project. So any questions, please? Unmute yourself and speak up.
This is Marcia. I have a bunch of questions.
Mm-hmm.
So how long is our current lease with Verizon?
I don't know. I don't know that it has an end date on it. Dick, do you know?
It's one that is renewable. Initially, back 20 years ago, they had talked in terms of it being at least for 4 or 5 5-year periods. However, that being said, in the document, it does indicate that TowerPoint could terminate the agreement if it became not feasible for them to continue. It has very broad discretion with 30 days written notice, but typically it has been something in which there have been every 5 years, there's been some things like, for example, they've increased based on the consumer price index, the rent has gone up, as you could appreciate, over that time. It was started out at $1,000 per month. And then with consumer price index changes, and then when there's been some amendments, sometimes it's gone up like an extra $125 or $150. But it is something where they could terminate it with 30 days written notice.
Unlikely, since they're spending the money on it, that they're going to terminate within the next 5 years. But
Yeah.
that we don't know, nor neither do they. Beyond much around that.
All right. So here's another question.
Mm-hmm.
Say something happens. Say the tower falls down, lands on a car, Or, you know, let's say they determine 20 years from now that people who lived within a 5-mile radius of that tower all got a certain kind of cancer and there's some liability. I'm just, you know, whose liability is that? Is that ours or theirs?
We have, as trying to recall back on the provisions, because there were several amendments. There have been 3 amendments to the thing. They have insurance, and of course St. Mark's has insurance. Now that scenario that you just described, of course, is a good one. It's one that I hadn't envisioned, so I haven't looked for that. You know, like if let's say that there's a cancer and people have gotten done, people have been subjected to that. They have liability insurance, but what I can do, Marcia, on a specific question like that, I can go back and look closely and see how a scenario like that might play out. But they have insurance, they're required to have insurance, and then of course we have our normal insurance.
Well, and in this case, you'd have 3 insurers. You'd have TowerPoint would have to have insurance on it because they're the ones who would own the lease. St. Mark's would no longer own the lease. TowerPoint
Right.
would own the lease. And so
Right.
at some level, it seems to me it takes us out of that completely, because it's then TowerPoint and Verizon who own that property and not us. We
Yes,
own the
that's a
property,
good point.
but the two people, organizations with liability, if TowerPoint picks it up, is TowerPoint and Verizon. We would be 3rd on the list and less likely to be included because we gave up authority for that amount of space to TowerPoint and Verizon.
Yes, but that's the reason why I asked Dick what the power output is, because you know that they are already aware that EMF radiation already exists, and if the power output that they have now obviously wouldn't exceed something that's dangerous,
Right.
but who knows if they add 3 more towers to it, then it could be more. And this is the world's greatest conspiracy theory, so I don't really want to get into that. I was just curious though, what the levels are that if Dick asked them, they would tell you what the levels are that where it would become a hazard.
My guess to some extent is the installation of any future towers or any additional significant changes to that property, I would imagine would be required to get permitting from the city of Chula Vista. And I would expect the city of Chula Vista to be monitoring those kinds of technical things on a tower installation or modification.
Sorry, don't be so sure. Sorry to be skeptical of that.
Fair enough, fair enough.
Sherry, while I agree with you that we would be number 3 on the list of liability, I'm sure we would still have liability because we are the property owners. And in the event of some unfortunate incident, they would name everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so my next question was, it sounds like TowerPoint's a very established business and they're successful. So they most likely already have a business plan and projections for subleases. Are they sharing that with us?
No, they're not sharing any plans that they have, any imminent plans. It's been that part of it's kind of hard to get that information out of them. The way they've described it is, I've gotten the impression that they don't have anything imminent. They always couch that in terms of, in the event down the road, we are dealing with someone and we're able to market this, this is what we would like to do. And I'm referring, of course, to that profit sharing agreement. And even if they found someone, and I tried to reflect this in the summary, that we still would retain a great amount of say in that. That is, if we found that it was with a telecommunications company that we weren't comfortable, or if we felt later it was going to encroach on our church premises in a way that we did not envision, that we could still veto that. But to answer your question, no, they have not said, oh, we're planning to do this in the first 6 months that we have this completed.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know if they have any kinds of, they've got to have some sort of a business model. If they've done this all over the place, it's like, okay, so this one is generating the most income for us, and this is the model that we've used. We've subleased it to X, Y, and Z company. So I would expect that they have some sort of a business plan that outlines their goals for this, rather than just, getting the income from Verizon. So I guess I would just maybe push a little bit more on them and just say, in the best case and a worst case scenario, I mean, it seems like the worst case is they're going to get the rent payments from Verizon. Best case, what have you modeled in other situations like this where you've been very successful? What does that look like? And is that what your business plan is for this site? I guess I would just push them a little bit more on that.
Yes, this sounds like a good idea. I can certainly ask, on these types of transactions, what percentage of, with this type of a scenario, what percentage of times have you actually engaged in a second agreement with the company? Typically, how long did that take from the beginning of your new business relationship? And, how did that all work out for everyone? So I can push to get more historical information on how that, what they have done in the past.
Yeah. And if it's like a goal. Okay, so just a couple more. I'm really sorry, you guys. I feel like I'm monopolizing this conversation.
Good questions. No worries. We need them answered. Thank you.
I guess I just wanted to know, so what would be done? Let's just assume we're going to go with the 30-year only. What would be done with the $300,000? Would it all go towards the loan? I can't, forgive me I don't remember what our loan balance is right now.
Okay, Diane, you want to speak to that?
Yes. Yeah, I'm unmuted. As of March, the loan balance is $285,185. The maturity of the loan will mature on May 1st, 2026. So it's got 6 years left on it. Got a balance of $285,185, and the monthly payments are $4,339.
Okay.
And we had a calculation on how much interest we'd save if we paid off the loan.
Yeah, of 34,000, I think I read.
Yeah, that was. I'll tell you, I just used an amortization table that I found online, and took it out, and I hopefully that's a close number.
Well, it's not going to be dramatically different. It's not going to be $10,000 less or more. It's got to be close to that. Okay. Does that answer your question, Marcia?
Yeah, it sounds like the church would use it specifically to pay off that loan. Is that a correct assumption?
Absolutely, and perhaps then help offset what we're still generating money to pay off the roof. We still have somewhere in the neighborhood of $50,000 in commitment in the roof, so it would go to help us offset the cost of finishing the roofing.
Okay. So
it would release then 43, well, less $4,300 a month minus the $1,800 we currently make in income.
Right, yeah.
Offset somewhere in the neighborhood of what, $2,000 a month in income, expenses
Okay.
for 6 years.
All right. So I have a couple more questions and then I think I'll be quiet.
It's okay. No
So-
worries.
So forgive me for not knowing this, Dick. Are you a lawyer? Because you said I'd be happy to look at the letter of intent and everything, or are we thinking of having a lawyer look at the letter of intent and the whole agreement reviewed by a lawyer?
Yes, I am a lawyer,
Okay.
retired lawyer,
I kind of, the way
actually.
you were speaking, I wasn't sure. It seemed kind of like you were.
I'm sorry. I graduated in 1978 from University of San Diego Law School. And my career has been in corporate law the last 17 years at Mutual of Omaha, overseeing attorneys there. But, I certainly don't consider myself the be all and the end all on this, but I'm certainly happy to help. And plus the price is right. Hopefully though I'm worth more than I'm charging, but I do happen to be an attorney, and I'm happy to help in any way that I can, or any way that you as the council and the congregation want me to.
Thank you for that. I just wasn't sure.
Mhm.
Okay, so 2 more questions. So during that 90-day period, during the letter of intent and where we're going back and forth on finalizing everything, are we still collecting rent from Verizon during that period?
I have not looked at the specifics of that, but I would say yes, we would be collecting rent, and there would be a time in which it would cut over, and that would, of course, typically be when it is closed. And so, but that would be something we would want to make sure is specified in there. So we know, for example, on that last month, and it would probably there, Marcia, be a proration type of a situation, up to closing.
Gotcha. Okay, and then the last question might be opening a can of worms, but say we sign for 30 years or 50 years or 99 years. I know everybody on this call hopes the church is still here and still thriving, and but what if it isn't? And what if 10 years from now the church council at that time decides it's time to sell the property? This is obviously probably an encumbrance on that. So I'm just trying to, I guess I don't, just trying to make sure that we understand, if we sign this, what that means for that potential.
Yes, and that's another good question. And the answer to that is a covenant that would run with the land as it is right now. So what that means is that, in the event that the property was sold for whatever reason, then they would be entitled to continue to be there, even if, something like that was to happen. So that would run with the land. So that covenant would continue on, is what that means.
It transfers to whoever buys it. It doesn't
Yes.
impact us any further after the property is sold, or whoever the owner is. Yes. Okay. Anything else, Marcia?
No, that was all my questions. Thank
That's
you.
okay.
Really good questions, Marcia. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Well,
And I will, Marcia, follow up on the ones, for example, the cancer question in terms of the liability, and dig down deeper on that. And, of course, pushing back with them on a specific business plan, historical, experiences they've had. So we have a better feel for what might happen, in the first couple of years of any such proposed agreement.
Yeah, and I guess the other question is just kind of, why would they want to go into a 30 or a 99-year agreement if they're basically saying that there's potentially only 8 to 12 years of useful life of it. So, why so long?
Mhm. And that useful life of 8 or 10 or 12 years, most of that input came from more unbiased people. That came from people who are technology, familiar with this type of technology. And I'm not saying by any means they have a crystal ball, because I don't think anyone knows for sure. But this is from some other literature that suggests that these types of agreements, they could go short term or they could go longer than we think, but it's hard to predict. And for me, it's like, when we look at like a 99-year one, or even a 50-year one, or whatever, it's hard to envision not just what St. Mark's will be like, but what will Chula Vista, what will California, what will this world be like in 99 years? And I think if I was to project, I think, after a relatively short period of time, and I don't know whether that is 10, 12, 15, 20 years, at some point, this equipment is going to come off of this land. And, they're just leasing, and as an easement, the use of that land. That property is always ours, as we all know. And at some point, just don't know when it's going to be, all that stuff's coming off the land.
Yeah, and my sense is that they're preserving it for any future purpose. If this satellite system goes and every location in the world is covered by satellite, there still may be a need for high point communications in areas, and they're guessing, they don't know what that is, but they are betting on the fact that that's worth their while for the small amount of money they're charging for it.
So
Well,
for
I just-
example,
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
may I ask if right now they're purchasing the Verizon lease, but they have the right to enter into leases with other telecommunications companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so say Verizon decides they don't want to renew their lease anymore.
Mm.
But by that time, TowerPoint has entered into agreements with 2 or 3 other companies. Of course, the plus side is we're getting income off of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it could go on and on and on, because it isn't just limited to the Verizon.
Right. It's a location for other uses. Mm-hmm. Telecommunication uses of some sort.
Okay, thank you.
And those are some of the things that when Dick is talking about the parameters in the agreement, making sure that we get say on if they wanted to put up a porn site on that or did something that we thought was completely out of line with what we wanted to be partnered to, we would have an opportunity to refuse that offer.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Other questions? Yeah, you don't need, go ahead.
So about like what Diane was asking, so if Verizon, this is not going to happen, but let's say if Verizon will go out of business,
Mm-hmm.
Then this company engages with another company that is not Verizon,
Mm-hmm.
will we still get the 60% of that? So even if
That's
Verizon is not there, because it seems to me like it was in addition to whatever, if they got business in addition to Verizon, but if they didn't have business with Verizon anymore, will we still get the 60% of a different company? If that was the only company at the moment that they engaged business with.
That's a very good question, Alicia, and the answer to that is they have a clause in their 14-section contract that says that they're entitled to a minimum rental amount. And in that situation, if Verizon had gone away and they had just these ones that were shared, they would get we would lose that 60% for a while until they had gotten caught up, if you follow me there.
Yes.
Yeah, so it's not like in that situation, we would not get the 60% if they're getting nothing from Verizon. And of course, they would be very motivated to correct that whole situation. But you're exactly right. In that case, we would not get certainly as much until they got another, until they got something established as with that primary agreement.
And will that be more clearly spelled out in our agreement with them, Dick?
Yes.
So, and so that, I mean, we kind of know what would happen
Yes.
if they lost the Verizon. Okay.
Essentially, if let's say they were getting, we'll make it just simple, 20,000 a year and from that Verizon, and then that went away and they had this secondary one where they were receiving 40%, essentially they would get the equivalent of the 20,000 to make up for that one, and we would lose our percentage as was discussed. But you see, that's for that initial easement. So they would, even if Verizon went away, they still have, you know, the tower there, and they could put a generator there. And so that would be, I believe, a short-term situation, but that's how it would work in under those circumstances.
So that they would have the authority to continue to enter into lease agreements with other companies to maximize their income until for the duration of the lease, whether it be 30 years or 50 years, or
Yes.
the duration of their agreement with us, whether it be 30 years or 50 years or 99.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think though that is anything like that is going to happen. And I think like Marcia says, I think they do already have their projections in income for some coming years, and that's what they're basing their price that they are giving us in, because they have tried to acquire this lease for some time. And they were offering before about 200,000 or a little bit more than 200,000. So I'm pretty sure they have looked into it and they have good projections, which will be good for us too. And that's why they have pretty much doubled their offer.
And I would say also, if I may, when we first began these discussions, and they had reached out to some other people, and they had gotten information where they thought the income we received from Verizon was about $400 a month more than it is. And they based the initial offer on $375,000. And then when I got involved and I kind of dug into the contracts, and I said, no, we don't get $2,200 a month. We get more like $1,700 or $1,800 a month. And they said, oh, but you know, because at first I was going to try to get it bumped up to maybe 400,000. And they said, you know, we can't do that because we thought, now this could be just a little bit of a marketing ploy on their part, but I know they got this incorrect information. I know that part. And they are saying now, well, if we had done it over again, we would have given you probably about 40,000 less. But because we've had those discussions, we've already put out an amount, and we've in good faith, you know, discussed it several times. I think that this 375,000, if I can tell, and is a pretty decent deal. And it is difficult, as you all know, to try to assess present value of future earnings, especially when there's all these variables and this changing landscape. But my take on it is that this amount is a good, a reasonable, and I think a good deal for St. Mark's compared with other offers and scenarios I have seen.
I agree.
Other questions?
You know, the only thing is if you take the current monthly payment that we get from Verizon,
Mm-hmm.
you multiply it by 12, right? So
Right.
you've already said what that is.
Yeah.
And then you multiply it by 30 years,
Mm-hmm.
it's double what they're paying us, right?
Right.
So you're basically,
You're making the assumption it's not going to last 30 years.
yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
You're trading one in the bush for two in the
Yeah.
field, you know?
yeah.
Sherry, you
And-
mentioned to me before too, that one of the reasons we didn't get the loan for the preschool that we were thinking of building was because of our very large mortgage. And that if we had a chance to get rid of that mortgage and look like we are more solvent, that it might be possible for us to attract the other kind of business that we need to become more sustainable. So, you know, this may just be the beginning of something else for us and puts us in a better financial position to attract that kind of business.
Yeah, certainly advances us by 6 years on not having another mortgage that would count against us if someone else like the preschool came to us and said, you know, we need $100,000 or $200,000 in improvements in order for us to lease from you at $5,000 or $6,000 a month to lease your property for a school. That would change it. Diane, would you like to speak to that? Anything more?
No, I mean, it's one of the things I think about is that we'll get this money and it'll be so wonderful and we'll pay off our mortgage and we'll all feel so good about that. And then we'll turn around and want to borrow more money and go back into that. It bothers me a little bit.
No, I wouldn't be paying it off for that purpose. But we weren't able to take advantage of the other one, which would have brought us easily put us in the black in a couple of years based on some of the calculations I saw from before. I wasn't here during that conversation, but certainly Chris Lewis thought if we'd been able to get the loan and be able to bring that preschool in, it would have brought in enough to have kept us solvent through that period of time when we were struggling.
Pastor Dan here speaking. There's many churches within the ELCA and other Lutheran bodies that do have preschools attached to them that have been very helpful for the church, but also been very helpful for the community. Mm-hmm. And, you know, from listening to you, all of you, and listening to you outside the walls of Zoom, to be able to have a mortgage paid off, to be able to have the extra to do and to start another ministry, if that's what you wanted to do, is a pretty amazing thing. Also, we cannot depend on the future. We cannot depend on even 30 years of, you know, that technology or that being there or San Diego still being here.
True.
You know, nobody thought we'd have COVID-19, and nobody thought that I'd have La Mesa burning down. So I'm looking at a little bit of the here and now. I'm looking at the future and also the best interest of you folks. But it's not my decision. This is your decision, of course. But I just see some great opportunities for ministry to have that mortgage wiped out, which is a real good thing. And two, to be able to have, you know, early daycare or whatever it may be, or, you know, there, because you have a great courtyard, you have a great facility that's not being used.
And you'll recall that Chris Lewis told us, I believe in January, that the Navy is looking for childcare partners. They are desperate for early childcare facilities in the South Bay. And I haven't pursued that because about the same time, that had to be early March, late April. I had written down, it was time to call somebody and start inquiring further, and then COVID-19 shut everything down. So I haven't followed up on that, but he and the call committee actually went to the to the Chula Vista person who knows what is what at the city government. It didn't talk to the mayor, but they talked to like a vice mayor or someone. And that person said the top two issues in Chula Vista, one is childcare, early childcare. And that's not just preschool, but that's childcare. And the other one, I don't remember what the other one was, I know it was transportation, the cost of transportation and finding work outside, so many people working outside Chula Vista, the commute. So, but the childcare is the early, and particularly the Navy is the one that's looking for childcare today.
Which
Resources.
is pretty consistent that we'll have the Navy around for a long time.
I anticipate
Uh,
anyway.
Unless things change. Who knows?
Yeah. Change is the only constant I'm learning. Okay, any other comments or thoughts? Dorothy?
I'm thinking too that if we no longer have the loan on the building, that would be another thing to attract a new pastor.
Yes. Yeah, certainly releases and it doesn't make it quite as tense as it is right now in terms of whether or not we'll make the budget by the end of the year. It would give us a little more flexibility. Okay, any other comments or questions? Yeah, it would definitely, it puts us, looks better financially yet for anybody.
I've got one here.
Yes. Thank you.
Several years ago, it was mentioned the fact that they'd made an offer and it was brought to the folks, and I spoke against it because I think it was only 200,000 and it would not have paid off the loan.
Right.
And at that time, where our condition was not very good, and I couldn't see that we could do away with getting our money coming in every month just to help cover our mortgage. Wouldn't have, because if we got to 200,000, it wouldn't have paid off the loan. We'd still been making a mortgage payment. The offerings were pretty scant at that point in time, as I recall. But I think if we can pay off the loan, we're money ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
Definitely agree with that.
Thank you. Really appreciate your input there, Herb. Any other questions? All right, I have a short 2-question poll. It will show up on your screen in a minute. All you need to do is answer, both questions are yes or no. Actually, both of them says there are 3 answers. You can answer yes, no, or you can answer, I need more information. Would you take a moment and click on the space that works best for you? You'll notice there's a little scroll bar on the right-hand side of that screen. You can click on the answer you think is where you stand. When I get all of the votes in, then I will show you the poll and you can look at the answers. This is just a test, just to see where we stand at the end of this conversation. It's not a long-term commitment. It's not a congregational vote.
Thanks, Dick.
I hope it was informative and helpful.
Yeah, it was.
It really was. Thank you so much for all the information.
Yes, thank you so much for all your help.
Okay, has everybody voted? Everybody's
Thank
voted?
you, Dick.
Okay, here I'm going to end the poll though so you can see, because 9 out of 10. Is there one person who hasn't voted yet?
Maybe the phone call,
Okay,
possibly Jane.
all right. Jane, are you still there? I saw she was out walking. Oh, there she is. She's in her car now.
We can't hear her, but I think she can hear.
Yeah, okay. All right, I will post the poll then, since we're looking at this. We've got 9 out of the 10 votes. So the question was, does it look like it could be a good deal for St. Mark's? 78% yes. 2 people said they need more information. So if you need more information, please make sure that you send a question to Dick or to Diane or to me, so that we can make sure your question is answered for next week. And then the second question was, it's simply a test, as I said, to see how people are feeling. 7 people, same 7 said, I think I agree that this is a good idea, and we still got those 2 who need more information. So those
Yeah.
questions are so close. Marcia?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment that, I mean, I guess I think I would probably vote differently if I knew the amount of time you wanted to do it for. I'm not sure 99 years would be the best option. So that would be the more information, is like, you know, what length of term. There were three links. So I would want to know that.
Okay. Okay, anybody else have another question that you had that you need answered before you're ready to go with that? That's important information for us. Okay, and you can scroll and see the results. All right, well, thank you very much for sitting online with us. Those of you who waited until we got people on, appreciate that time up front. Thank you for your hour and 45 minutes online with me and with Dick. Thank you for your input. Excellent questions, Marcia, worthy of, the council has been asking Dick those kinds of questions for the last 2 months. So that's why this comment sheet is as big as it is that his overview is because we've been asking him all kinds of questions. We just hadn't come up with those yet. So please keep thinking about what this means. I originally said that I thought we'd do one between services next week. I'm thinking I hadn't thought about the fact we could actually post this online for anyone to be able to go back and listen to the entire report. I think what I'll do is plan on another meeting then on Sunday the 21st, do another one at this time to answer additional further questions. And I'm trying to think about the best way for us to do a congregational meeting and a vote on Sunday the 28th, or that weekend, the Saturday, Sunday. So if you have any ideas on how you think we might be able to get a valid vote without trying to get 35 families online, let me know what your ideas are. We can certainly do an email out to everybody and ask them to respond with a yes or no. But I'd like to find a way to make sure that we make sure everybody gets an opportunity to put input. So if you have ideas, make sure you let us know. Okay, any other comments for the good of the whole?
Is either of you, Debbie or Sherry, are you going to be writing a little report of this or no?
Well, we've had it in the last 2 newsletters, information about this. I don't think I have posted that full fact sheet that you've got, Sherry. We could definitely post that, at least on the website too, and we could link to it with a just a recap that we had this conversation and that this meeting has been recorded, and here's more information if you just want to read about it. We definitely could do that. Good idea.
And it'll be accessible to see to listen or watch the entire video online as well. It'll be on the website. Yeah.
Can this be translated?
Can it be translated? I don't know.
Well,
if Marjorie doesn't have time, because I know she's doing more at this time, if you can send it to me, I can translate it.
Okay. Oh, the document, the proposal itself.
Yes,
oh,
document.
Yeah, that would be easy.
No, not the whole conversation. No.
Yeah, 45 minutes might be.
No, not the whole meeting. No, I'm sorry.
Yeah. All right, no worries. I was also thinking of maybe typing up the Q&A that Marcia came up with and kind of a little point. I've got my points on that one. So I'll try to assemble something like that, run it by Dick to make sure I was accurate in the answers. And then we can post that with the proposal information that we reviewed today.
Oh, when you have all together, you can send it and I'll translate it.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Good deal. Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions? All right, God bless you all. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Dick. You're amazing. I appreciate all the time and effort you've spent on getting us this far.
Well, thank you. I hope it helped.
It did. Thank you so much. Yes.
Yes. We didn't start at the beginning. We started far enough along that we had most of the questions answered. So I think that's the PowerPoint here. All right. Thank you all. Have a lovely day.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.